Hello, 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 and welcome to another one of our HR on the Offensive live streams. It's me, Chris Howard from Lace Partners, joined by the fantastic Julian Holmes from our People and Workforce Analytics practice. How you doing, Julian? You all right?
Very well, Chris, and welcome to everybody. Come talk SWP with us.
Yes, come with us. I was about to drop in the green room. We were just singing a song which we will keep to ourselves, but I was just about to jump into a bit of Willy Wonka, "Come with me and you'll see." But let's not subject our watchers and listeners to this, because what we want to talk about and what I wanted to grab you just for 5-10 minutes today to have a quick chat about was the Strategic Workforce Planning Conference, which you and your team attended last week, I think it was, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's right. Strategic workforce planning, we are just finding it's such a hot topic at the moment, something that myself and the team have got several years of experience with, but it's interesting. It seems to be having a rebirth, a regrowth at the moment. SWP Conference, I think it's run by Takana in London, in Aldersgate. Me and several other people got totally lost. We totally failed to find the venue, but eventually, we all got there. And just really well attended. Loads of very, very good speakers, and lots of vendors and things as well. So very, very interesting, I think, for everybody who attended who's interested in strategic workforce planning.
Lovely. And just before we talk into, because what I want to do is I wanted to grab just maybe 5-10 minutes with you just to talk about any of the key nuggets that you thought from the conference that were really, really interesting, because this is such a big topic for us. I think this is also going to be a big topic for a lot of HR professionals going into next year. We're certainly talking about it in terms of our planning around things like people-led business transformation, and some of this feeds into it. But perhaps as a scene setter, could you give us a little bit of an overview as the types of people that go along to this conference? What sort of HR professionals are heading along there? How well attended is it? I guess volumes, some of the, maybe one or two of the vendors that kind of are there. Of course, what we will say at this point, as a tech agnostic organization, as an industry agnostic organization, there are other vendors that you can speak to other than the ones that Julian's about to mention. But just, I guess, to set the scene and give a little bit of a flavor, if you could talk a little bit around the composition of the conference itself.
Yeah, that's right. So what I would say, maybe just an overall theme first, then SWP just seems to be such a hot topic. So what you have is the business being very interested in things like transformation. I think there's a whole piece, as you know, you've been talking to others about skills-based organization, the relationship between skills and strategic workforce planning. There are still people who've been running strategic workforce planning for many years, and perhaps they're taking more of a process-driven, more of a sort of a cost-based approach. So really, in terms of the attendees there, we have everybody from people who are running an SWP process today, perhaps been running it for a number of years. We have people who are interested in setting up an SWP capability within their business. I think, for example, we had Peter Cheese there from CIPD, sort of talking about how he saw strategically in terms of, the UK job market, UK HR, how important SWP was as we face increasing sort of demographics, being competitive, growing our influence on the market. And in fact, today, I don't know if people have seen, there's a whole piece around sort of unemployment in the youth at the moment and creating jobs for them. I think it's like 1 in 8 people, youth people are not in work at the moment. So, there's a huge kind of, shall we say, both from the supply side, people who are available, but also the skills and experience and expertise that businesses need to be successful. And strategic workforce planning is a way, I guess you could say, of modeling those things and bringing them all together into one piece. And then in terms of I guess you'd say like providers, there would certainly some other consultancy firms there. There are also technology firms, some of whom coming at it from the skills angle, some of it coming more from the modeling angle. Gartner were there with Talent Neuron, for example. So there are different, the way that I put it is that there are different lenses into SWP, and we can perhaps talk a little bit about why are those different SWP lenses.
Yeah, go for it. Actually, that's a good idea.
Yeah.
Let's start with that then, and then we'll talk about some of the other sort of nuggets, because you mentioned when we were having a chat earlier an interesting conversation from one of the speakers at Jaguar Land Rover, so it'd be good to unpick that maybe. But
Yeah.
lenses, that's all right.
Well, so actually, one of the vendors worth mentioning is Equate. They're based in Australia, and real thought leaders in this space, and they did a very amusing presentation on essentially it was a one size doesn't fit all in terms of strategic workforce planning. So they kind of dressed up in different costumes, because they were going to different parties. You wouldn't want to go to the other party wearing the wrong set of clothes, basically.
Yeah.
So we had a cowboy and we had a kind of, I can't remember, a business person, can't remember. Anyway, I think that's one of the really key things is SWP can be used to solve different business problems or to address different opportunities within business, and therefore the approach that you might take might be quite different. So a couple of things they drew out, are you trying to solve a specific business problem in a specific function, specific area of the business? Or are you trying to do something that's organization wide and sort of longer term, trying to do something that's more hygiene based? And depending on what they were describing was, depending on the outcomes that you were trying to achieve, you might take quite different approaches. And I think that certainly came across in a lot of the speeches, is as different people presented, they might be having, slightly different takes, slightly different lens in terms of what their business context was and the problem they were trying to solve.
Yeah. Can we talk a little bit around the conversation, the Jaguar Land Rover example that you gave? Because I thought that was particularly interesting when we were talking about that, particularly with this idea of skills and like future planning for skills, and how some organizations, big organizations, are having to pivot in what they need as part of their future workforce plans.
Yeah, exactly right. So I'll talk about JLI in just a moment. I mean, one of the big things, of course, was about the impact of AI, in terms of work and sorts of skills that people needed. That was brought up by several presenters. Jaguar Land Rover, of course, huge car manufacturer, very much going through the process of moving away from internal combustion engines to electric vehicles. So therefore, a lot of their traditional skills, while they're still needed, they still need some new skills in things like software and engineering, and in things like electrification and battery technology. And I thought one which they identified as being particularly interesting is, particularly in the luxury car market, how important the audio-visual aspects is of these luxury cars. And then describing historically that side of the business, the sort of, all the audio unit and the infotainment and things like that was outsourced, but now that seemed to be a strategic priority, a kind of a differentiator in their market going forward, and therefore they're moving that capability in-house, because that means that they can really double down in terms of investment, building up the skill set that they need, and being able to have a competitive vehicle ultimately. So I think that's a really nice example of essentially a business outcome they want to achieve. They want to really be at the forefront of the luxury vehicle market, but that's got people implications, it's got financial implications, it's got skills and talent development implications, and SWP has been sort of the framework, the model by which they can make that happen.
Yeah, and it's quite a fascinating on that, because if you think about the Jaguar Land Rover of 10, 20 years ago, and you've got these big production lines and things of people with certain skills, and now they're having to pivot away. So that's a really, as you just said, a really, really good example of organizations that are using the models of strategic workforce planning to look for their future development and growth. One of the things I wanted to ask you about, again, we were talking about this as a team earlier, was there was a bit of a discussion that some of the other team members were talking about KPIs. So how do you actually measure the outputs, the benefit of running through some of these programs? So can you kind of reflect a little bit on some of the questions that perhaps were being asked at the conference by people when it comes to, okay, how do we actually measure this?
Yeah, so I think trying to give a simple answer to this question, right? So one of the things about strategic workforce planning is it's about looking into the future. And I can't remember who the quote comes from. Is it goes something like, prediction is really hard, especially when it's about the future, right? Of course, what we're trying to do in SWP is we're trying to identify the different factors that might affect your business outcomes, and therefore how many people you need, what types of people you need, what skill sets that you need. Therefore, you've got a bit of a question, a bit of a point there, right? Is that although that you need to have the right people in the right workforce to achieve the business outcomes you want to achieve, the actual business outcomes themselves are affected by a whole bunch of other things, which are typically not in control, certainly not of the HR team, probably not in control of the business. Like, what are our competitors up to? What are our what's the economy doing? What's happening politically? Particularly some of the announcements going on at the moment around the world around tariffs and stuff. So, and certainly my experience around this is really what you need to do is that one of the most valuable things you can do is actually say, well, what are the actions, what are the decisions that we took as a result of the strategic workforce plan? And what would have happened if we didn't make them? Would we still have been able to make that revenue, or would we still have been able to launch that new product? And so you can't quite say that there's a causal effect, but you can say, but if we hadn't done that, that was one of the conditions that was necessary for success to actually make that outcome happen. So that's the kind of way that I've seen strategic workforce planning used. I'm thinking now about like a bank in the wealth business. Ultimately, they need to have a certain number of wealth advisors to be able to achieve their business plan. So the strategic workforce plan around, and this is how many people we need, this sort of skill sets they need, this is how we're going to be able to repurpose people we already have in the business, but these are the additional sort of skills and talent we need from the outside. That was an example of a fairly direct outcome of a series of strategic workforce planning decisions that led to them being able to deliver their business outcome.
Yeah, and you make it a really, really good example when we were chatting before, kind of like how much would it cost for us to hire all of these people versus retraining them, and then the difference that you get in terms of cost to your business. That's a way in which you can measure it. We are almost out of time because obviously we only tend to keep these sessions short and sweet. Is there any kind of final bits that you wanted to call out about the conference that perhaps you haven't touched on? I appreciate that there's lots. I mean, it went on for 2 days, so there's lots of good stuff in there. But any kind of final bits before we wrap up?
No, I think I just think that as HR increasingly becomes more strategic and wants to add more value to the business, SWP is and I think very importantly, it's working with finance, it's working with strategy, is a way that HR can help bring the importance of people to life for the senior business sort of stakeholders. So I see SWP as something that people will be doing more and more and more of, particularly in businesses where, in growth businesses where they just can't grow if they don't have the right people, to deliver the results that they need. So, I think it's of great interest to CPOs, to HR directors, to people in talent, and perhaps, people in analytics functions or whoever's doing some of this work at the moment. So I only see this as a growth area. We talked about, I think most people in the conference thought we can feel the wave coming. Perhaps the peak of the wave isn't here yet, but the wave is coming.
Yeah, and it's really, really interesting. And certainly from a LACE perspective, we're going to be talking about it, I think, a lot more as we go into 2025. I've kind of given a little bit of a nugget on we're looking into people-led business transformation. So if you're a regular follower of our content, then please feel free to keep in contact with us, because it's a lot more that we're going to be doing with you. One of the things I'm just, as we wrap up, showing up on screen is a link to our skills campaign, Becoming Skills Powered, at the moment, because these two things are very, very intrinsically linked. And Julian has obviously already touched on quite a bit of this conference and how organizations are looking at how do we build for future skills. So if you want to check out our campaign that's going on at the moment, we've got a whole raft of different pieces of content. You can do so on the link below. It's lacepartners.co.uk/skills. But Julian, thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you, Chris. Pleasure.
And hopefully we're going to catch you next time on the HR on the Offensive live stream. Bye-bye.